The Pride of Baltimore, too, is looking forward to a big year in 2012 because it's the bicentennial of the War of 1812. The Pride is a replica of the Baltimore schooners that sailed as privateers in that war, and their sailing performance made privateering a profitable business in spite of the mighty British Navy. That's a largely forgotten chapter of history that we'd like to revive in 2012, and we've made this video to show you how we're gearing up. At the end of the 2011 sailing season, Pride went into a winter maintenance mode at our pier in the Canton section of Baltimore Harbor, stripped out inside and shrink-wrapped as you see here. One major winter project was a much-needed major overhaul of the Pride's deck. Here you're seeing the first step in that project, which was removing the old pitch between the deck planks. That kind of work hasn't changed much in 200 years. After that, the deck was sanded and treated with several coats of penetrol oil. And you're seeing here the next step, in which the mast seams are being readied for sealing with pine pitch. Pine pitch is a solid that becomes liquid when heated, so volunteer Judy Ann Hargers got the propane heater going while watching the temperature in the pot.
Okay, hot pitch.
That hot black liquid pitch gives off a rather nice piney smell. Modern chemistry provides alternatives that are easier to use, but the Pride always prefers to stay with traditional methods used by the builders of Baltimore schooners 200 years ago. And pitch actually works very well once it's applied. The pitch has got to be poured into the seam before it cools too much, but after cooling and hardening, the excess is trimmed with a hot putty knife. Needless to say, doing the whole deck like this was quite a project. The winter maintenance crew had to deal with lots of other projects besides that deck. The spars were a major example, and you're seeing here the big shrink-wrap tent on the Pride's pier where all her spars were housed. This allowed for sanding and coating each of those spars with 3 layers of varnish, so that was a big job where volunteers were really helpful. Once the spring crew arrived in March, all that shrink-wrap disappeared and the uprigging process began. That means putting things back together again in working order, and you're watching lots of fittings being mounted on those nicely varnished spars. Some of those fittings attach the spars to other spars, some serve to attach the sails, some connect the control lines running to the deck, and others give secure attachments for the foot ropes that the crew stands on while handling the sail. Now you're looking at the foretop yard, all set up with a sail attach, getting ready to install it on the foremast. Sailors would call this a dressed yard, and dressing is easier on the pier than aloft. The foretop yard and sail together weigh about 1,000 pounds, so raising it up 80-odd feet and securing it on the foremast requires not only careful planning, but good teamwork. The 6 new deckhands haven't done this before, so you're seeing Captain Jamie Trost making sure everybody understands the process. The bosun is the officer responsible for the rigging on a sailing ship, and Elizabeth Fortek knows the Pride well, having worked on Pride for several years. She's double-checking all the gear up there to make sure it's ready to deal with the strains of lifting the spars. Now it's time to get that 60-foot-long yard off the pier and attach it up on the foremast, where it will hopefully reside for the rest of the sailing season. Once it's suspended by the attached halyard, its ends need to be controlled by the tag lines handled by the crew.
On the Tagala halyard, take up! Take up!
Lifting that big load is done using the double winch system known as a crank haul, and it takes quite a sustained effort to raise it up there. The Pride spars are going up pretty much the same way those Baltimore privateers did it 200 years ago. Still, it's impressive to note that those sailors did this sort of thing while at sea. During combat, cannon fire was often directed at the rigging, and privateers certainly took some hits. There are other heavy loads besides the spars that need to be loaded on Pride, like this life raft. Pride has 2 of them, and they're constant reminders of the fate of the first Pride, where a life raft saved the lives of crew members who survived its sinking. For the new deckhands, uprigging the ship is not only a lot of work, but a critical opportunity to learn how to work the Pride. Even though they all have experience on other tall ships, they haven't seen anything as complex and true to 200-year-old history as the Pride of Baltimore, too. A lot of effort goes into organizing the multitude of smaller items needed to run a ship of this size. Based on lists developed over years of experience, groups of these items are laid out on the pier before stowing on board. Here's First Mate Sarah Whittam working with Judy to make sure everything is checked out before transfer to the appropriate compartment on Pride. When it comes to navigation, the Pride makes good use of modern electronic technology because safety generally trumps historic tradition. Here you're seeing engineer Abby Iverson wiring up a new navigation instrument in the deck panel. This sequence was shot just prior to the Pride's departure from Baltimore for Portsmouth, Virginia, where she was hauled out of the water for annual maintenance work on the bottom. There were lots of things that needed to be on board, and rigging the sails had to wait until she's back in the water. So Pride motored going south, but hopefully will be sailing coming back. In some of those previous clips, you could see that Captain Jamie Trost often took a hands-on approach to overseeing the uprigging process. What you didn't see was Pride's veteran captain, Jan Miles, always close by providing guidance. But as the new acting executive director of Pride's whole operation, Captain Miles had to spend lots of time in the Pride office across the street doing his director duties. Here the two captains and mates Sarah Whittam and John Pickering are going over last-minute details as the ship is about to depart for Portsmouth. So we've shown you some of the maintenance and uprigging work we've done to get the Pride ready for her bicentennial year in 2012. She'll be back in Baltimore in April, and we hope you'll join us in celebrating those privateers of 200 years ago.